All right, welcome to another edition of Off Topic, courtesy of backsportspage.com. My name is Randy Zellea with this very special guest today. We have the creator of The Dark Side of the Ring, Evan Husney. Husney. I'm butchering your name. I apologize, buddy.
It's all good.
So there's so many different avenues really to start with. We can start with. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Where did you come up with the idea of The Dark Side of the Ring? Are you a filmmaker, or were you a fan and just wanted to explore some of these topics? How did this whole thing come together?
So I've been a wrestling fan ever since I've been about 5 years old. So, it's come in and out of my life at various different times. But, always, been a fan of wrestling. And it wasn't until my best friend, Jason Eisner, who makes the show with me, he and I, both came from the film world. He's a feature film director, and I had been producing documentaries at Vice. And he'd also grown up as a wrestling fan as a kid. And so we connected probably about 11 years ago now, maybe something like that. And we both just kind of, our friendship sparked out of our youth passion for wrestling that we had when we were younger. And that just kind of snowballed into sharing videos, going on nostalgia trips, and buying old action figures, and just really getting back into wrestling, in a big way together. And then it was just kind of like we went down this, long story short, we went down this YouTube rabbit hole of shoot interviews, and then starting to listen to all these incredible interviews from wrestlers that we watched growing up, and just the storytelling was so incredible. And then the one story that really captivated us was the story of Bruiser Brody, who was a wrestler that was not really, he was a little, like we were too young to have liked him when we were kids, because he had already passed on, by the late 80s. And so when we really got into him as a wrestler, we just thought he was just an incredible performer. But then his tragic death, this very unresolved murder, more or less, was just a captivating story in its own right. And so then we really felt like that could be an interesting subject for a documentary, kind of blending true crime and wrestling into this very exotic kind of thing. And at first we thought we would just try and get a documentary about Bruiser Brody off the ground. And then that just sort of morphed into doing a show and turning it into a series. And then I was working at Vice at the time, and they had just launched a TV channel. And then that just kind of kept going from there. And we never would have imagined that just, a few years later, we would have had 16 of these, episodes out into the world. It just would have been a crazy thing to have imagined. But yeah, it was a crazy process putting it all together.
I listened to Conrad and Bruce Pritchard's podcast, and they were discussing the documentary on their show, and they said it took a little while for it to get off the ground as far as making it to air. Can you talk about some of the issues you had as far as getting this to air? Because controversy. Eric Bischoff always says controversy creates cash. Mm-hmm. But what kind of roadblocks did you guys get getting this finally? Because Bruce filmed season 1, way before obviously he went back to WWE. And this aired when he was back in WWE, correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
What's that? So what roadblock did you guys hit?
Well, so several. The first really being trying to convince a network that's never really done a documentary piece about wrestling, or at least nothing major on wrestling, or a network that's never really done a documentary with any reenactments or anything like that. So there was a lot of salesmanship that went into getting the show greenlit every step of the way. And one of the main hurdles was just getting people on board creatively, figuring out how we could make it with from a budgetary point of view, how it was possible to make, because it's a pretty complicated show. It involves a lot of travel. It involves, like I said, reenactments, actors, a separate studio. It involves archival footage. And and once we sort of nailed that, and we had to go and make the pilot. So we actually made the Bruiser Brody story first. And the challenges of that, of course, is that, you're relying on family members and other people that, trust you with the story, that'll allow you to tell that story. And so building the relationships with the family, and wrestlers like Tony Atlas and other folks, that was a process. And also Dutch Mantel, that was a real process in terms of just like, because, we hadn't proven ourselves. We hadn't really made anything in this world that we could really point to, and, wrestlers can be kind of skeptical of, marks or, fans or even journalists, especially more so maybe even. So it was just a long process of like building the relationships with the people in the show, simultaneously getting the green light to get the money to make the show. And, and then of course, once you get the trust from the subjects, you have to tell them like, hang on, the money's coming, hang on. And they can't lose faith in you. And so it was a constant kind of push and pull to get that off the ground. And then once we made that and delivered it, we thought it was kind of a slam dunk. We thought we kind of knocked it out of the park. We were pretty proud of it because we spent a lot of time on it. But then that just introduced a whole nother layer of hurdles in order to actually get the show fully greenlit for a full season. And that took a lot, like an additional round of major salesmanship, budget number crunching, things like that. And then after we made season 1, and that was done, I thought we knocked it out of the park. We had to do a whole nother campaign to get the show on air. So it wasn't something that they just threw on air immediately. They actually were going to sit on it for over a year. And I just kind of couldn't accept that and just fought. And finally, they actually put it on air. And of course, it became, I didn't expect it to be as successful as it did. I just wanted to see it out there, for the families and for the people. And then once that finally did well, then things started to fall in place a little bit more for us, where it was a little bit easier to make the show from there.
How frustrating was that delay of getting it on air? Because like you finished the series, and that must have been like, dude, I got this thing here that we put our blood, sweat, and tears in, and you guys are not doing it. Just give us give us the chance. Let us air an episode so we can. Paul Heyman. I always like to use little thing. Paul Heyman, says his promos on TV or his auditions for the following week. So basically, you're like that first episode is your audition to get the second episode out there.
Yeah. So basically, well, I thought, it was just kind of the opportunity to prove ourselves. And basically, what happened was, we finished the season 1. And there was a little bit more of a push and pull too, because we were supposed to have 10 episodes for season 1, and then halfway through production it became 6, which actually was a lifesaver in terms of just the workload and kind of everything being so uncharted the territory for us into making the show in the first place. But after we finished it, it was like, waiting by the phone, like, when is this thing going to air? And I actually made some random appearances at the office, knocked on doors. And
that's selling like lemonade right there, baby. Just go door to door and selling stamps and baseball cards, just like the old days.
Just trying to figure out like what's going on with the show, and trying to bump into people in the hallway and start conversations. What's going on with the show? And literally, we just really couldn't get a straight answer. And the only answer I got was that they were going to hold it for season 1. I'm talking. They were going to hold it for February of 2020. So imagine if season 1 had like just come out a few months ago. It'd be crazy. So I was really crushed by that. And it really took like another show of theirs to unfortunately not be successful. And then once that happened randomly, we basically just, we saw an opening and said, hey, this is and I think AEW was just starting at the time.
Yeah.
They just announced their cable deal. And so we basically put forth kind of we basically said, look, like wrestling is going to be big on cable again. It's not just going to be this monopoly thing. There's going to be another competitor. It's going to be on 3 major networks, and this is an opportunity for us. And then of course, that really what wound up to be true.
And it's funny too. You said before you had originally slated for 10 episodes. You got 6, which was easier for you. What got left out, if you don't mind me asking, of season 1? What topics did you guys not hit, and were they hit in season 2?
Yeah, they all were hit in season 2. Originally we hadn't decided what the full 10 were going to be, even while we were in production. But we had started filming the Dino Bravo episode. So that we filmed actually most of, and we had to put it on the shelf. And then we had filmed a few interviews for the Brawl for All episode, which we also were going to have as season 1, but that had to be shelved, those interviews. And then we had started to plan to do the Chris Benoit episode. And that, again, it's just another, I'm glad that didn't come together, because we just wouldn't, it just wouldn't have been the same. It would have been rushed, and we probably wouldn't have had the access that we had for season 2. And, but we had started, making the relationships with, the people involved in that story earlier back in season 1. And it really took that whole time to research and develop that, that 2-part episode, so we could really tackle it for season 2. And thank God, I'm so happy it actually worked out that way.
Was there anything that shocked you when you're doing some of the research for these stories? I can go through any of these episodes and probably name a couple of them. I'll name one, the Montreal Screwjob. Was there anything that you learned by doing that episode that shocked you?
Well, I mean, again, it's like when going back to season 1, it was like trying to figure out what this show was going to be, right? Okay. Like, was this show going to be? But yes, there was something that shocked me, but it was kind of like, the Montreal Screwjob is such a classic story. Most wrestling fans are already familiar with it. A lot of people were like, "Why'd you do it?" And it was kind of like we had to kind of figure out if the show was going to be like, here's the best stories from the world of wrestling, and for everybody, not just for wrestling fans, but so everyone can, appreciate and understand these stories. You have to talk about that story. So that was kind of the idea, was like to do it more, for a more mainstream audience, which we try to make all of our episodes, accessible to non-wrestling fans and everything. But the Montreal Screwjob episode, I was pretty well versed in that story. It's, been a huge fan of, Wrestling with Shadows, the Bret Hart documentary, and all the information that's come out since. But the one thing that I didn't expect, that we got for that episode, which was pretty cool, which is when we went to Jim Cornette's house, and Jim, we basically just got him on the show because, he's a good talker. He's a great storyteller, and he's a historian, and you really need one of those, you need like a spine, like you need like just a voice that can speak about everything and in sound bites, and it can be very engaging. And he kind of checked those boxes, for us. He's the easiest person to edit, in our show. It's always so succinct, and he knows exactly what we need. But anyway, he volunteered that information about, pitching the sharpshooter spot that they wound up using during the Montreal Screwjob. And that was really cool because he'd always left that detail out for so many years. And he basically felt now this was the opportunity to mention that little detail. And we weren't really expecting to get anything new out of this story, even in doing it. So that was kind of a fun little surprise.
Let's pick a different one from season 1, the Macho Man one. The story, there's with Randy Savage. I can tell, since you're an old school fan.
Yeah.
A lot of us have always wondered. I know we're not talking about the Macho Man Elizabeth, what I'm about to say, but we always wondered why Macho Man was never welcome back in WWE. That could be a whole nother show topic for you.
Sure.
But is it crazy to think a guy who's that legendary who doesn't get the respect that he deserves? And you look at his backstory with Liz, and you hear stories about on how much of a detail-oriented guy he was as a wrestler. Are you surprised that he does not get as much love in the industry that he does?
I mean, I think he does in some ways. I mean, more so in the last few years, I think he has. Of course, going into the Hall of Fame, which he did a few years ago. Even though that wasn't necessarily his wishes.
Yeah.
But
he wanted his family to go in. Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted his full family to go in. And, and like I think, CM Punk has always kind of nodded to him quite a bit over the years. And, you hear, he's still kind of mentioned, but he's not like, I mean, he is to me kind of the quintessential, to me, for my money. I know it's not like, Hulk Hogan obviously drew the most money, but Macho Man Randy Savage to me is a quintessential wrestler, in the fact that, like a Ric Flair, in the fact that he's a great wrestler. First of all, he's an incredible actual wrestler, and he's you can't beat him on the mic. And just as a personality, and somebody who really was larger than life in so many different ways. And then, of course, to have that just kind of interesting, meta sort of, relationship with Miss Elizabeth that was scripted, and also, a sort of behind the scenes drama, is just also fascinating and alluring. But, I think, yeah, it is a little strange. I do think his departure from the WWF was something that Vince took very personal, and I think that you could even kind of see that in, when Vince announced it on Raw, whatever, 1995 or whatever, 94, 95, whenever that was, when he announced that Randy has left the company, and he never did that really before with anybody else, or
Right.
I don't think he did.
And no, and never did it again either. He never.
Yeah.
So
I never did it again. And then, of course, talking about Bruce Pritchard, his story about when, Vince just came into the car, and, with Bruce and Pat waiting in the car, and he announced to everybody that, Randy's left. And I don't know. I think it probably was something Vince took a little personal, and, Vince, wanted to keep Randy back to be like more of a commentator, and Randy felt he had some more years left to get in the ring. And so I don't know, but I think, one of my all-time favorites for sure. Definitely on my Mount Rushmore.
Bruce had mentioned in a couple of different shows with Randy. We'll move on after this, but get your take on it. He said in '96, when his contract was up with WCW, he negotiated and came to terms verbally to come back to WWE, and then he skipped out and went back to Nitro.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah. So another.
So maybe it's more of a trust factor of Vince saying, "Listen, this guy's given me his word twice. He's going to hang out with us, and now he's going back, keeps leaving. So, like, how can I do business with them? Not this I'm not going to even go into the ugly rumor that's out there on why Randy's not there. It's just not. It's because I just don't believe that's true. I think it's more of a business thing, because Vince would put business over. Look what he does with his own family on television. I think that if Vince could find a way to draw money with you, he's going to do it. So, with season 2, obviously the two major episodes were the bookend episodes, the season premiere with the Benoit episode and the Owen Hart episode at the end.
Right.
Which one was a little bit more difficult to put together, and which of the two, because both were, I think, two of the biggest stories in wrestling history. Both sadly involved deaths of great wrestlers. The Benoit story, which is a tragedy because no one ever will know the real story. And then the Owen Hart situation, which the facts are there, but it's just so much bitter feelings between Martha and the WWE and the family not wanting to honor Owen. So let's start with Owen. Okay, let's start with that episode. Let's I'll go to the end and then move back to the beginning. Sure. What was that like, talking to the family? And trying to understand their perspective, because the wrestling fan base will not to this day understand why Martha will not let Owen into the Hall of Fame, and also let her late husband be honored by the company.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the very beginning of doing this show, especially when we finally named it Dark Side of the Ring, I mean, it was like, how you can't avoid not touching on that story, on the Owen Hart story. Owen Hart meant a lot to me growing up as a kid. My dad's name is Owen. Owen Hart was the only other Owen I've ever known, other than my dad. So yeah, it was a very personal story to me, because I remember that day very, very, very well. Watching the pay-per-view live, on TV, which I did, and then of course the next day at school was a rough one. I mean, that profounded me, really affected. Like that affected me a lot, because it was really probably one of the first tragedies of someone I looked up to that had passed on. Like, he was kind of like my Kurt Cobain in some ways, maybe even of the 90s. But anyway, so, it was something we always wanted to do, but the episode always had an asterisk next to it, because it really depended entirely on if his family was going to participate, because that's obviously the only way you can tell that story. So it was always kind of basically like a maybe on our list. And I started to reach out to Martha Hart via email. And one of the things that I found was that I think the reason we wanted to tell the story and the reason we wanted to dig up those old wounds was because of the way the fans looked at that situation, which honestly I had always personally felt was like a real strong entitlement issues that the fans had around that. Because, to me, well, let me back up a second. Because at first, even when I remember when the tragedy happened, and I would say for about 15 years after that, I basically kind of looked at this scenario as a freak accident, because that was predominantly what the WWE narrative was. So this just was a freak out of the blue accident. And so then I think, that fit really well with the narrative of, fans. Whoops, sorry. Oh, you there?
I'm here.
Oh, sorry, I lost you. There we
go. There we are.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
No problem.
That was a freak accident. All right. But yeah, so and that really fit really well with the narrative of WWE, fans having malice towards Martha, because it was like, well, this was just an accident. Why would you hold it against them? And then it really wasn't until the 20th anniversary, just a few years ago, or last year, when people started doing new articles and they started doing new podcasts, kind of chronicling the events of what happened. And that's when I really started to pay attention to the facts. I hadn't read Martha's book. And it really was like, wow, there's a lot of factors here. There's a lot of, things that were, there's just a lot of aspects to look at this story where it is a little bit more than just, a freak accident. There was a lot of avoidable aspects and a lot of other things. And so that, to me, really the thing the reason we really wanted to do it was because of that fan outlook. I felt like it really was a story that deserved to be re-examined for that reason. And so I contacted her via email, and Martha was open to talking to us, but she just basically sent us like a very thoughtful list of about 10 or 15 questions that she wanted us to answer and take our time answering on email, and which we did. We took about 2 weeks and wrote like a 3-page essay on why we wanted to do this story, which actually really helped us because it really kind of found we kind of found the reasons why we wanted to do it through that exercise. And we did that. And then based on that response that she agreed to meet with me, and I flew out to Calgary and had a conversation with her and her son, Oj, and we all just really got along super well. And then after that, we just kind of, had an agreement in place, and then we started to film the episode pretty much at the last possible second. And because, our show was going to air in 2 months, and we had to start filming it. And so we filmed it pretty quickly, edited it pretty quickly. And then the last shot of reenactments we filmed was 2 days before Ontario shut down for the coronavirus. So
wow.
We literally snuck that episode in the last down to the wire. So yeah, that was a wild experience.
With that episode, was there anybody, because you were so under the gun, that you wanted to speak with about the situation that you couldn't get with? Maybe Davy's son, or Brett, or members of the Hart family for their side. Was there anybody who you tried to get, and just because the timing, you probably wanted, if you had like another week or so to get it done, you probably could have fit some more in?
Well, there's a couple other factors too. I mean, obviously we didn't know what was going to happen with the world, but one of the other factors was that Martha, agreed to do it with us, but she also had plans to make a feature-length documentary about Owen, and she didn't want this project to necessarily take away from that opportunity, and we didn't either, because she had been planning to do that for a long time now, and she just recently, actually a couple weeks ago, announced that it's actually coming out next year, and they're starting to work on it this year. So we we knew we could only do a 42-minute piece on this, so it pretty much had to be focused around the events in Kemper Arena for the most part, and even then that was challenging because you could have spent another 20 minutes just talking about the court case, which was equally fascinating in other ways too. So it was challenging to get it all into 42 minutes. I will say that, but we were given the opportunity to tell the story, and so we did. And but for those reasons, there were other people that we would have wanted to talk to. There were people. I mean, we did ask Brett to be involved in the project, even despite that it would just be focused on, mostly focused on the tragedy. But unfortunately, I've talked about this before in other places, but Brett actually wasn't a fan of the Montreal Screwjob episode that we did about him. And that's only my guess as to why he didn't respond to our inquiries about being part of the Owen project. But we actually never heard back from him. But we really wanted to have him in there for obvious reasons. But once that was kind of a factor, because Martha's voice has kind of been something that is a little marginalized. And also, you really had to have been someone that read her book in order to understand a lot of about that story from her point of view. So we looked at it as an opportunity to basically tell her story, which really hasn't been told that much.
I read her. I did read her book on and how towards the end, Brett was there for her for a while and then drifted off. And for whatever the reason, we will never be in their brains, and we're not there in that situation of why that relationship went sour. But the simple fact of the matter is, I know there's a lot of fans who are clamoring for Owen Hart to go into the Hall of Fame, and the Martha and the kids who just won't let it happen because they feel that the company took away their father, and that's just
exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
That's the part I think today's fan base who watch Owen on the WWE Network don't understand. They don't understand. No. And I think that's the part where I'm glad that you guys were telling that story so they can understand why that happened.
Yeah, and I also think that I think that with the help of the episode and getting her story out, I think the point of view on that is the tide's turning a little bit. With that, because I've seen a lot of people on Twitter and social media, almost apologizing, saying, I've directed my, frustration towards Martha, and now seeing the full story, I understand more. And I think it's just more, because mostly WWE's narrative has kind of dominated that story for the most part on that. And, yeah, and I think also Martha now kind of is, finding other ways to kind of keep Owen's name alive. I mean, obviously the Owen Hart Foundation has been an incredible way to keep Owen's memory alive. I mean, she's done some incredibly noble things in building schools and helping single mothers, and and that stuff's infinitely more important than a wrestling Hall of Fame. But she also is finding ways to keep his name alive amongst the fan base, by putting out new shirts. And and there's a lot of avenues that I just don't think were even possible. Like WWE had such a monopoly on merchandise and action figures and things for so many years, and now that there's more avenues and there's other wrestling federations and there's other things, now there's probably more opportunities now than there ever were for Owen's name to be more associated with wrestling. Because for a very long time, it was WWE was the only game in town. So I think you're going to start to see a lot more Owen Hart stuff.
One of the other, there's two other episodes before we get to the Benoit episode. I have to ask you about one being the Road Warriors episode.
Yeah, what about it?
Yeah, how that was definitely one where it felt, because again, I grew up a long WWE fan. I've met Animal. We've talked a little bit about Hawk a little bit. Was it hard to get the real? How difficult was this one to put together?
Well, it was a lot more difficult than I thought, honestly, to be honest. I think like the whole origin story behind doing the episode. Well, first and foremost, Jason and I are huge Road Warriors fans. I mean, we have been for a very long time, ever since we were kids. They're some of our favorite aesthetic is the Road Warriors, and everything. So, we had toyed around with doing the idea way back to even season 1, and it was just basically, you know, wanting to make kind of a puff piece on the Road Warriors, kind of just getting into just, you know, just kind of paying tribute because we were such big fans. And also it's a hometown story for me. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, you know, that also gave me the opportunity to go back home and, you know, we actually flew everybody back to Minnesota for that episode, which is kind of cool because we'd never really done anything like that before. Anyway, but there were a lot of challenges because I felt like, you know, typically our show doesn't necessarily dive too much into the bio of a wrestler's career. You know, that we kind of leave for more of the WWE style documentary. Our show kind of dives into one aspect of someone's story, or a series of themes, or just like, or very specific things, more so than a broad career. Because you can't fit the career of the Road Warriors into a 42-minute episode. It just doesn't work. And I felt like this episode, when we were doing it, I felt like we kind of spent a little bit too much time maybe doing that, and maybe we should have pulled back from hitting some of their career highlights and focusing just more on the human drama of the story, which I think is what's the most interesting about that. I mean, for our show. But you know, but then again, like, you know, the show has some of my favorite moments in all of season 2. I think Paul Ellering's just amazing emotional words at the end of the episode is maybe one of my favorite moments in all of season 2. And the opportunity to shoot those reenactments and to actually build and make our own shoulder pads was enough of a reason to do it for us. But yeah, it was a really cool experience, and you know, just to be able to hang with those guys and to kind of pay tribute was something that we really felt like we really wanted to do.
The other episode, of course, was the mass transit incident with ECW. I remember that when that one happened, and I was 16 years old when that happened. I was like, man, when that story broke, I'm like, wow. I'm like, this might be the end of ECW right then and there, because that they got their pay-per-view pulled initially because of that incident. So
that's right.
Yeah. So like, how obviously you would love to have gotten Paul for that.
Yes.
But can you talk about the difficulty with New Jack and understanding what the mindset was of that episode? Because a lot of my guys who I hang out with are ECW fans, and it's a crazy story.
Yeah, well, so when we started plotting out season 2, we threw out a couple of questions to social media asking our fans, like, you know, what stories they wanted to see us cover. And the mass transit story or a New Jack story, you know, really was right up at the top of the list. And so, you know, and I'd grown up a pretty big ECW fan as a kid, around 99, 2000, more so in that area is when I really got into it towards the end. But I was a huge ECW fan, so New Jack was somebody always on my radars, even as a kid. I had the action figure and everything. And basically, we wanted to do an ECW story. We wanted to cover that world. And going into it, we weren't really sure if it was going to wind up being like a mass transit episode, or if it was really going to be like a New Jack sort of episode, which is what it became. But it was pretty straightforward. I mean, you know, we contacted New Jack and he was down pretty much right from the beginning to do it. And then, you know, his interview was amazing. And then, yeah, it is one of my favorite episodes that we've done. I think it packs a very unique energy. And it's also, I think everyone kind of has a different reaction to it. It's interesting. The people that I show it to, or the feedback that I've gotten, you know, it's pretty interesting to see how different people react to that story. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite episodes that we've done.
And of course, like we were discussing before, the Chris Benoit episode, and to this day, I think it is the story that almost took down the wrestling industry at that time. What hurdles did you have to get through to get that episode done? Was there anything that really surprised you with the information that you didn't know at that time? Can you talk about the making of the Benoit episode?
Yeah. So Well, again, it was a story that we knew we had to at least look into if we're covering sort of the dark and controversial stories within wrestling. And but it was kind of just like this big question mark as to how we were going to do it. And like I said, we started looking at it for season 1. Thankful we didn't pull that trigger because we just weren't ready to tell that story. We didn't have the street cred. We didn't really have. I just don't think we were ready. I know I wasn't ready to tell that story or to have that sort of responsibility. But it started with Chavo Guerrero Jr. So Chavo, I was introduced to Chavo during season 1, and we spoke. And Chavo really, I said, we're doing the show, and we actually showed him the Bruiser Brody episode, and because we had it finished at the time, and he really liked that a lot. So he knew he wanted to work with us. But he was very he himself also wanted to get more into film production, and he had been working on Glow. He's actually the trainer for all the girls on Glow on Netflix.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
He works with all the girls. He's in the show too. He makes a couple cameos, and he works with all the girls, and they all love him, and everyone loves Chavo. And he's just a super nice guy. He's just one of the best guys. And so he basically, came aboard as a producer on the Benoit episodes that we wound up doing. And we would never have been able to get the access that we got without Chavo. So Chavo really was someone that we had to listen to. He guided us through that process. He introduced us to, Sandra, and he introduced us to Vicky, and he introduced us to Dean, and he got us, to Jericho. And of course, then, Jericho became the narrator of the show. So, we got all this access into the inner circle of this story because of him. And, it didn't happen overnight. It wasn't something that just, it still required a lot of, patience and a lot of building trust, having a lot of conversations. And to, like, for example, he introduced us to David Benoit. And we flew David Benoit out to Toronto where we make the show, and we just spent time with him for like a whole weekend, just hanging out, going to arcades and having fun and going to bars and just talking and getting to know one another. Because if we're going to take this journey together, you never want to appear like it's like you're just vultures, circling around like a story, and that's never been our MO. We've always wanted to tell these stories for good reason, and we are fans and we are passionate, and we want to be sensitive to this, and we want good to come out of it. That's what we ultimately want, and then of course one of the things that was surprising to us, which we didn't expect, was that David Benoit and Sandra, Nancy Benoit's sister, had sort of started to rebuild their relationship after the fallout of the tragedy in 2007. And so then it just, but we didn't want to exploit that for the cameras necessarily. But like just having that kind of underlining narrative happening in an episode really was kind of this very positive force around a very, very sad story, a very, very truly dark story. And to really see them, the first time that they had seen each other in the same room or been in the same room was while we were filming that episode. So that was just a really powerful, emotional, really like palpable feeling that you could have while we were filming it. And it really felt like something major while we were making it, that, you can't manufacture that or anything. It's just it's such a natural thing. So that was a wild experience. And all the pieces just kind of came together and, with that. So
how was working with Chris Jericho as far as the voiceover is concerned?
Working with Chris was great. It's interesting. We had this sort of dilemma on our hands, which was season 1. We worked with Dutch Mantel as our narrator, basically because we loved his voice. He was the first wrestler I ever talked to in regards to the TV show, and so he was an early believer in us. And we kind of felt like, we needed a narrator. And so we asked Dutch, and of course he did it, and he did a tremendous job, amazing voice. But we ran into a dilemma with season 2, which was that the show had to be financed differently. it had to be financed through the Canadian government system. So we actually had to, a narrator is classified as a lead performer by Canadian tax definition. So we had to actually have a Canadian narrator for season 2, which was at first not our, it wasn't our choice to do that because, we just wanted to continue working with Dutch, and then of course, because of that, we had to find a Canadian narrator, and it was like, well, better start at the top of the list. And as it fate has, I guess we were, we were doing the interview with Chris for the Benoit episode, and I just floated the idea to him in his kitchen of, hey, would you want to narrate the whole show? Like, you got a Canadian passport, right? And he said yeah, and he was a fan of season 1, and it was really that simple. I mean, he really pretty much agreed to it right then and there, and then working with him was awesome because he was very passionate about all the episodes. And he works on like a playback, like he has like video playback while he's recording the voiceover, and we're all watching it together. And when he's recording a line, he'll like pause like right after he records a line. He'll always kind of have some sort of historical anecdote to bring up about a personal experience or just like his own personal take on what somebody has just said in the show, like, that guy's full of shit, or that thing's amazing. And like, one little funny thing is when we were doing the Herb Abrams episode and just seeing all the weird intersections that even his, like his very first debut on Nitro, which I never knew, like Jericho debut, his first Nitro that he ever appeared on was in the same venue that Herb Abrams' first UWF pay-per-view was at. And Chris was such a huge wrestling fan. I mean, he knows everything. Chris knows everything about wrestling, and he's a huge historian in his own right. And Chris, when he walked in the door of Nitro, his first show, he just was like, whoa, this is where, Beach Brawl was, like, whoa, like, so it was pretty cool just to get all these little facts from him as we were recording. And he got really passionate, really, really, really passionate with the Owen Hart episode. He called me at 4 a.m. a couple times to relay.
That sounds like Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. A couple 4 a.m. calls to relay ideas, which was awesome. If you would have told the 12-year-old me that Chris needed your attention at 4 a.m, I would have been there. But no, it was just great. It's just like, that's awesome. Like I want somebody, if we're going to have someone in that role as the narrator, I want someone to be that invested. And he really was that invested. And which is really cool. And so, yeah, it was a blast working with Chris.
All right. I know we're against the clock a little bit. Season 3, if you don't mind me asking, what are some of the ideas that are being floated out there? I know that I probably can give you a list of 100 ideas. What are you guys thinking so far?
So, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we want to make season 3, and, Vice wants to make season 3. Hopefully we're coming together on something soon. The fate of the world is a little in question mark as to how we'll make the show, but we're trying to make it happen just with given everything that's going on, the uncertainties. But yeah, there's a lot of episodes that we really want to do. A lot of them are access dependent. Usually I keep a lot of the stories like to my chest, because
gotcha.
More so only out of just respect to the people that we would need to have in them, and we want to give them the courtesy of being, the first to know and the first to, say yes or no without any sort of public pressure. But some of the ones I can talk about that I've mentioned before is one of the episodes I really want to do, which I think is just a really compelling story, and we really want to do the WCW in North Korea event. Okay. Would be just because that's like the largest attended wrestling event ever is in North Korea, and there's a lot of wacky stories that happened on the ground there. And it involves a weird international politics with Antonio Inoki and North Korea and Eric Bischoff and Muhammad Ali and Scott Norton and Hawk and these just colorful personalities who are kind of just finding themselves on the ground in North Korea. And it's a bizarre story. So I think that would be very fun to do. I'm trying to think if there's any others that we've really talked about before, but I mean, there's tons.
Can I throw one or two out there?
Please go for it. Yeah.
What about the rise and the sad ending of Yokozuna?
That would be interesting. I think anything, involving the that family, would be interesting,
Yeah,
to do for sure.
because you have Umaga in there, you have Rosie. That whole family is all tied together, and they
Yeah.
that's an interesting one.
Huge
And
Yoko fan too, by the way. Huge Yoko fan. He's amazing. Yeah, huge fan.
not, and I know this one has already been done to death by the WWE, but I think with we all leave out the financial in the business, and the Ultimate Warrior story from '91 has always been an interesting one to touch on.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, a lot of people. I'm kind of surprised at the number of people that have recommended or asked for an Ultimate Warrior episode, and it's something I need to kind of wrap my head around. In terms of how we would do it. Again, I'm like. I'm always a little nervous on doing kind of a big sprawling bio episode, but if there's a way to boil it down, maybe that would be interesting. That's something I've thought about for sure.
And then I think you can't not focus on the. I'm not just throwing this out there. Obviously, with Jake and DDP and that story is also a great one too. I don't know if you've ever thought about. Look what DDP's been able to do with that house he has, where he brings all the wrestlers in who have Scott Hall and those guys.
Definitely. Yeah, DDP is someone that's never been on the show, but I've met him once during one of the StarCast events. He was super cool. I think he would be awesome on the show in some capacity. I think that there is an interesting story to tell with Jake, even though I wouldn't want to take anything away from the documentary that they did on him and on DDP, but I'm sure there is some interesting stuff there to explore for sure. There could be.
And the last one I'll say, just because I'm a huge fan of his, and he's like on my bucket list of interviews I've always wanted to do, but CM Punk and his departure from the wrestling industry, it set a real negative tone because he opened a lot of doors as far as his negligence, as far as the medical side of the industry. There's no union, there's nothing. So that's
another story a lot of people have asked us to cover. It definitely, I think, would be our most contemporary story. And but I know he's a fan of the show, which is super cool. So yeah, you never know.
Yeah, like I said, it's always fun where you can start throwing the ideas out to the guy who runs the ship. So I figured I'd take my shot and leave it at that. So if you let everybody know where they can find you on social media if they wanted to follow you and also this is the time to plug. Let's plug away.
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Evan Husney, just my name. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Dark Side of Ring, and then on Instagram it's just at Dark Side of the Ring. We're hopefully have some cool announcements coming up. Hopefully there's some season 3 news we'll hit soon. We've been putting out a number of T-shirts, which is super exciting. We have
Wrestling Tees.
ProWrestlingTees.com. We've been collaborating with a lot of the folks that we worked with on the show. So, for example, Martha Hart has put out a few Owen Hart shirts under our banner. We just did a couple of Nancy Benoit shirts, which I think are my favorite. They're incredible. So you can look at these brand new woman shirts that we've put up. We've done a Road Warriors tee, Bruiser Brody tee, a couple other really just cool things that are gonna happen. Hopefully this Bass Pro Shop version of our Dark Side of the Ring hat will go on sale at some point. I don't know. And then the soundtrack. That's the other thing I'll plug, is the soundtrack is now available on Apple Music and Spotify, and it'll be shipping. We also did a double vinyl version of the soundtrack, and the soundtrack's incredible, by the way. Andrew Gordon McPherson and Andrew McNeil. Andrew Gordon McPherson and Wade McNeil. That was weird. They're our composers. They do a fantastic job. I mean, it's more than a third of the show. I mean, the show wouldn't be the same without their music. And the soundtrack is just an incredible testament to that. So check that out, too. And those are all my plugs.
Evan, thanks for giving us some time today, man. I really appreciate it. I know I was hounding it. I was hounding it for a little bit, but it's all
good, man.
And we really appreciate you coming on, man.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
The creator of Dark Side of the Ring, Evan Husney. I really appreciate him coming on, talking about the show. We had a lot of fun with, and tune in tomorrow, backsportspage.com, off topic. We're trying to get some more great guests on. I have some more writer interviews introducing our staff, and we'll see everybody then. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you soon.